First of all, I started by saying I owe you and everybody else present an apology for the fact that I haven't been here for earlier parts of this hearing. I'm afraid that other business kept me away, and I'm particularly grateful to, I don't know if she's here, but Fran Littler, who liaised with my office to make it possible for me to appear at a time that suited my diary as well as everybody else's. I'll be as brief as I can. I want to set this in just a little context and explain why I am taking the position on behalf of those that I represent. Now, on the 30th of November 2014, I received a telephone call from Mrs. Anne Gloag telling me that, and this was while I was at the House of Commons, telling me that she had acquired Manston Airport. She intended to invest heavily in it, and she was going to give it 2 years to try to turn it around and make it succeed. I was therefore, you will understand, sir, not a little surprised when 3 months later I learned from BBC Television South East that Mrs. Gloag intended to close the airport and to seek housing development upon it. That situation created, in turn, a mass, local political movement. And at the 2015 general election, every serious candidate for the parliamentary election and the majority, the overwhelming majority of local authority candidates at the same time, stood on the platform of reopening Manston as an airport. The results of those elections, I think, demonstrated very, very clearly indeed the political support and the political will behind the move to open Manston Airport. In fact, I had met with and discussed with the only serious player bidding, that was the River Oak Corporation of America, who finally, on the day before the airport actually ceased operation, offered Mrs. Gloag the asking price, which was £7 million. That was rejected. The political context then was that I gave the fullest possible support on a cross-party basis to the new leader, UKIP leader of Thanet Council, Councillor Wells, on the basis that he had been elected on a manifesto to see the airport reopened, and that we should therefore work together in the local and in the national interest to achieve that end. I was not a little disappointed when at the end of July, having met at the end of July with the leader, and being assured that by August the 12th of 2015, Thanet Council, under his leadership, would enter into an agreement with River Oak for a compulsory purchase order, to find only a couple of weeks later, having made a visit to the Carter and Musgrave operation on Teesside, he had changed his position and decided to renege on the possibility of a compulsory purchase order. My view, and it's been strengthened rather than weakened in the current context, is that Manston Airport Airfield is a site of national strategic importance as a piece of infrastructure, as well as, of course, very important locally and in the county of Kent. Given the slightly unexpected, perhaps, result of the referendum last June, it is clearly the case that the United Kingdom, to thrive, prosper economically, is going to have to develop much more business with Asia and with the Far East. In terms of freight, a lot of that, of course, will come by sea. Some of it will come by in belly cargo, in passenger aircraft. But the fact of the matter is that freight capacity in the southeast, freight capacity grew last year by 6.8%. There is nowhere for new freight to go other than Manston in the southeast. I believe, therefore, that it is absolutely vital in the national interest and I believe that this is a view that is shared by government, that we need to see Manston reopened and developed initially, certainly, as a major freight hub, and then subsequently, hopefully, to carry some passenger traffic as well. You will know, sir, that that River Oak, having not secured the cooperation of Thanet Council, have embarked upon the process and set in train a development consent order. I believe that the business plan that has been put forward for the airport, and this is all very relevant, by the way, to the 4 applications that we're considering. It's a precursor, but I'm trying to set the context. I believe that the business plan, the new business plan, is very different from those that have been tried before. The investment needed and the investment secured is very, very much greater than anything that has been put into Manston before. We're talking about sums north of £150 million. And I have met with some of the potential investors who quite clearly have the resources to do this, if the opportunity presents itself, as I now, in the national interest, hope it will. The development of the airport and the reopening of the airport is important for the United Kingdom. It's also very important locally in terms of jobs. The alternative proposals that have been put forward are, so far as I can see, blue sky plans that would create possibly a few short-term construction jobs and not much else. Now come to the planning applications that are before you today, and it appears to me that this is effectively a Trojan horse operation designed to frustrate the reopening and the redevelopment of Manston for aviation purposes, because these 4 applications are very specifically for non-aviation related purposes. And I understand, and I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong, that it has been indicated during the last 2 days that in fact 2 of the buildings it is proposed will be demolished and a new building will take place. The insertion of any non-aviation use within the perimeter, and effectively airside in the case of, I think, all but certainly most of the buildings concerned in the application, would of course impede the redevelopment of the airfield for aviation use. That is not the same as saying that there should not be or could not be or ought not to be ancillary work that is aviation related. I'm thinking particularly of aviation engineering, for example, and the taking down of time-expired aircraft, which are directly aviation related. So it seems to me that in the context of the project that we are seeking to bring to fruition, and if I again use the word in the national interest, it's because I believe this very strongly, these applications are designed not actually out of necessity or to add any real value to the local community or the national community, but rather to frustrate a proposal that's being put forward, which is to reopen the airfield. There is actually no demand whatsoever and no need for these buildings to be turned into other non-aviation use. Discovery Park, that was until relatively recently owned by those currently in control, I use the word loosely, of Manston Airport. Discovery Park still has huge capacity, and far from being the much vaunted success that Councillor Paul Carter, the leader of Kent County Council, claims, has actually certainly attracted some business. I don't dispute that for one moment. Indeed, Laura Sands, then the Member of Parliament, and I worked very hard to get enterprise zone status for what was Pfizer's, now known as Discovery Park. But in fact what's happened is a lot of companies have moved in, but they've been transferred in jobs, not new jobs. I'm not saying there aren't any new jobs that have been created at Discovery Park, I'm sure there are. But they are few and far between compared with the overwhelming majority of the jobs claimed at Discovery Park, which are transferred in jobs. But there is plenty of industrial space there. There is also 17 hectares of industrial space in the current local plan. And I believe I'm right in saying that that's also in the new draft local plan. Our estimate, when I say ours, I'm advised by people who know rather more about this than I do, in terms of planning and necessity, say that that 17 hectares is roughly double what Fenner is likely to need for the foreseeable future. Some of that, of course, is immediately adjacent to Manston Airfield. So if anybody actually wanted or needed to build new industrial space of a non-aviation kind, there is immediately adjacent to the airport land available. I can therefore see no need for any of this proposed alternative use. And I come back to the conclusion that therefore this is a fairly deliberate attempt to frustrate a development consent order and the restoration of Manston as an operational airfield. Looking specifically at the 4 applications, I note that these were submitted many months ago now, but that in spite of that, so far as I'm aware, no environmental impact assessment has been submitted in support of these applications. It's not clear whether or not, other than by River Oak, any environmental impact work has been done. There are considerable concerns relating to the aquifers below Manston Airfield. Were the full industrial and housing development to be allowed to take place, I think it is very likely indeed that it would damage the water supplies for the whole of the Isle of Thanet. The irony is, of course, that were these 4 particular applications to be allowed to succeed, they could actually impede what has been put forward as an alternative business plan for the whole of the Manston Airport site. Thanet Council, as you know, sir, withdrew its objection. They originally instigated, I think, this, or they were responsible for the instigation of this inquiry. And that was done on the basis of a report produced by a company called Avia Solutions, which claims to be expert in the field of aviation. And that report endeavoured to indicate, and I use that word advisedly as well, because I believe they started from a conclusion and then sought to prove it, that there was no future for aviation at Manston. Well, of course, as I've already indicated, to some extent that's been overtaken by the Brexit events and the very considerably likely increased demand for air freight traffic for high-value goods. But to me, I had to approach Avia Solutions myself. They didn't approach me, in spite of the fact that I probably know as much about the history of Manston as anybody other than Rex Goodman and David Steed, who know where literally all the bodies are buried. But I was not approached, so I approached them. And with some reluctance, they came to see me at the House of Commons. It was quite clear that the 2 people that came to see me, who wrote the report, I believe, had no grasp whatsoever of the history of Manston, didn't know its development from its very early days through to its aviation use as a military airfield, as then an American Air Force base, as a subsequent search and rescue helicopter base, or of its transfer to seaborne aviation, and then its final transfer under the 1997 Labour government to full private ownership. In the early stages it was leasehold. None of that seemed to be within their ken or remit. And all of the information that they appeared to, they weren't very interested in anything I had to say, I should have, but all of the information that they then appeared to base their conclusions on seemed to be on one side, and I'm afraid, having given evidence to a lot of people and a lot of inquiries over a long period of time, 33 years in the House of Commons, so I'm not entirely inexperienced, I can only say I was not remotely impressed by the strength or the ability of either their case or the intellect behind it. Finally, you'll be pleased to know, were the development consent order not to either proceed or succeed, then it is clear that in any event, a huge amount of not only environmental but other work would have to be done, archaeological work, before any alternative development plan could be put forward. And I would therefore suggest, sir, that whatever happens in the future, now is absolutely not the time to grant on appeal 4 planning applications that, so far as I can see, are little short of mischievous and could only seek to damage the true prospects of Manston Airport, which we have to get reopened in the national interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger. As I said, it would be most helpful, Sir Roger, if you could perhaps provide a written summary of what you've just given to the inquiry. I've taken pretty extensive notes, but it will, just for the record, it would be most helpful. I did say also that you may be asked questions. I don't know what Mr. King, do you wish to ask any questions?
Yes, please.
Sir Roger?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, good morning. When you refer in your evidence to River Oak, who do you mean?
Initially the River Oak Corporation of America, which is an entirely American-based company, and subsequently the company that's been set up in the United Kingdom to progress the project. I know there's been criticism of River Oak as an American company, and there's been quite clearly a lack of understanding of the process and nature of the kind of company that attracts capital, venture capital company with a view to taking on a particular project. But you and I will know and understand that if you or I wanted to build the new Dartford crossing, we would set up a company. Even though we might already have a head company, we would still set up a separate company to undertake that project. That is what is happening in the case of River Oak. I should say, again, just to clarify the situation, I held no brief whatsoever for River Oak, other than that they are the one serious player that has stuck with this project since before the airport closed, and clearly have demonstrated the capacity and the resources to reopen the airfield.
When did you become aware that it was now River Oak Strategic Partners Limited, the UK company who had taken over the promotion of the project?
I can't put a date on it, but I should think pretty much as soon as it happened.
Which was when?
As I said, I can't put a date on it, but and I don't consider it to be particularly relevant.
Well, never mind about that, Sir Roger. If you could kindly answer the questions which you're doing. You can't quite remember, but you think around the time it happened. Is that the answer?
Yes.
What's your understanding about whether or not the US corporation, River Oak Investment Corporation, LLC, still has any interest in or connection with the project?
Senior members of River Oak, the parent company, are heavily involved and interested in the project. It's a long time since I've met with Steve Donato. I think I've met him twice, and that would have been back in 2015 probably. But I have no problem either way, because it is abundantly plain to me that the company that's been set up to do this job is attracting the interest and the financial resources to see it through.
Sorry, the question was, what's your understanding? Perhaps I'll put it more directly. Do you know whether or not the US corporation, River Oak Investment Corporation LLC, any longer has any connection with or interest in the project?
It will certainly, I would imagine. Do I know for certain? No, I don't. Does it matter? No, I don't think it does. I do know that the members of the River Oak main board are taking a keen interest in what's happening. I'm not certain that the connection between the two is any longer very relevant. There is a company that's been established to do the job, and that company is establishing the resources with which to do it.
Well, in that case, it seems clear that you weren't aware, as Mr. Yerrell told us a couple of days ago, that the US corporation no longer has any interest in or connection with the project at all.
Well,
Were you aware of that?
Factually, I'm quite prepared to accept that may be the case.
All right, you weren't aware of it anyway.
Factually, I'm prepared to accept that may be the case. But that does not alter the fact that the personalities involved are clearly taking a keen interest in it. Now, whether they have any financial interest in it is in this context actually immaterial, because it is the new company and the new people involved, or the people that are involved in it, that are attracting new investors with a view to putting, as I said, in my evidence, north of £150 million into creating the hard standing and installing the fire services, the radar, the landing lights and everything else that's going to be needed to create a state-of-the-art modern freight handling airport.
So the answer is no, you weren't aware of that. Is that correct?
Factually, yes.
Yeah, all right, good. And you don't know, I imagine, from your previous answers, do you, why it is that the US corporation no longer has any involvement in the project? You don't know the reasons for that?
It is absolute standard practice when you're pursuing venture capital project of this kind to set up a company specifically to do that job. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Why should it?
So the answer to the question is no, you don't know.
The answer is I know it's relevant.
You don't know and you don't think it's relevant. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you're on record, I think, Sir Roger, on a number of occasions, as having stated publicly your support, obviously for the project itself, but also your belief that River Oak has the resources to deliver the project. Yes?
Yes.
And
just let me clarify that, just so we're absolutely clear what I'm saying.
of course.
River Oak, per se, does not have resources. Companies of that kind don't. Companies of that kind attract investment. And I have met personally with some of the people who, not all of them obviously, but some of the people who've expressed a clear and serious interest in investing in this project through River Oak, and who have the capacity to do that.
And over what sort of period have those meetings between you and potential investors taken place?
I should think about a year and a half.
Up till when?
About 3 weeks ago.
I see. Mr. Yerrell's evidence, did you know this, has been that the evidence of sources of funding is going to be provided in the DCO application?
Yes,
Yes.
my understanding is that at the appropriate time, and that is clearly not until the submission is made, and I would certainly expect this as a Member of Parliament,
Yeah.
all of the environmental impact work will be made available, the business plan will be made available,
Yeah.
all other relevant information will be available, that will then be public and transparent,
Yeah.
will be subjected to a public inquiry for open examination, at which point anybody who objects to what is being put forward or chooses to challenge it will be able to do so. That is entirely proper.
Thank you very much for that. Anyway, thank you, I was coming on to that, that's most helpful. But evidence about potential sources of funding is not yet in the public domain, is it?
Nor should it be.
Well, perhaps I could just interrupt a moment. I just want to make it clear that to everyone that my concern is with the 4 appeals that have been, they were, 3 of them weren't determined, 1 of them was refused, and the council has now withdrawn its objections. I'm a bit concerned that we might be going slightly off the issue here. I appreciate, Mr. King, we heard evidence from Mr. Yerrell and you're asking questions.
Yeah.
Sir Roger about that, but I'm keen to keep the inquiry on track as to the planning merits, really, of the appeals that are before me. But I don't, if you've got any further questions, then
1 or 2, thank you, sir. I had many fish, Sir Roger has kindly anticipated 1 or 2 of them already. So I think that's. There's just one other thing, if I may ask you. Have you seen a detailed business plan, Sir Roger? Has that been shared with you by River Oak yet?
Of the kind that will be submitted to the planning inspector?
That's what I mean.
No.
No.
I have seen sufficient in writing to satisfy me that this is a viable proposition. I would not expect, and I think it would probably be improper of me to require or to be shown at this stage matters that will be made public in the fairly near future.
I'm sure you're quite right about that. Just finally then, as I say, your previous answer actually covered this. It's for the settled party at least. I know we'll agree that it's for the Secretary of State ultimately through the DCO process to decide whether or not to grant consent to the project.
Absolutely.
And I think this you have already said, the great majority of the material that will need to be submitted as part of the application, including all the environmental information, is still in preparation and isn't yet in the public domain. That's correct.
That is absolutely correct. That is my understanding. I assume that's correct.
No, I think that is right, Roger. And you no doubt appreciate too that River Oak intend to include in their application for development consent order powers of compulsory acquisition to enable them to get ownership of the site, in short.
Well, that is normally part of the development consent order process.
If it needs to be, and it does in this case, yes, absolutely. And you will also appreciate that River Oak, in order to secure those powers, will need to demonstrate a compelling case in the public interest.
Absolutely.
That's the policy test. And actually you've said publicly, haven't you, as I understand it, that this is more or less a direct quote, but correct me if I'm wrong, if River Oak's environmental survey and business case doesn't stand up to scrutiny and River Oak's application is rejected, you'll accept that?
What I actually said, and I said it on BBC Radio Kent, which is about as public in Kent as you can get, both the listeners heard it, is that that's unkind to Radio Kent, I shouldn't say. But what I said to Radio Kent, unprompted, I was asked a slightly different question, was that if River Oak submit, or indeed any other company, but it happens to be River Oak in this case, submits an application for a development consent order, and either the planning inspectorate rejects that, or it is rejected subsequently either on recommendation or otherwise by the Secretary of State, then I will retire as a Member of Parliament. Because I believe that this is vitally important in the national interest and in the local interest. I believe that once a facility, I was going to say like Manston, but there is no other facility like Manston, is gone, it will never be recreatable or achievable again, and that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a facility that we need in the southeast of England, that we need in the United Kingdom, to serve our business interests post-Brexit. And I would not accept that decision from my own or any other Secretary of State. And honourably, therefore, I would only have one course of action. That would be at the next general election to retire. And just for the record, in case anybody wonders, I've been reselected to fight the next general election at this stage.
But would you want to be seen, I'm sure, to be prejudging the outcome of the DCO process?
No, absolutely not. That's a matter for the inspector and the public inquiry and the recommendation.
The next inspector, not this one.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Whoever is appointed to it.
Be clear.
I'm sure that Mr. Dunn gets time off for good behaviour.
I wish.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you, Mr. King. Thank you, Sir Roger, for your contribution.